My sister called me poor at Thanksgiving then. A helicopter landed on the lawn. What followed tore our family apart and rebuilt my dignity. If betrayal, justice, and late redemption move, you hit subscribe and join me because every story deserves to be heard. My name is Charlotte Hayes, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one in the family, the one they said would never succeed. No one defended me. Imagine sitting at your parents' table being laughed at by the people meant to love you most. That night, I realized silence had cost me too much. They called me poor at my own parents' Thanksgiving table, and no one defended me. The chandelier above the dining room glowed gold, throwing long shadows across the untouched dishes spread over the polished oak. The turkey-cooled, untouched cranberries glistened in their bowl, the smell of cinnamon rolls clung to the air. And still what everyone remembered of that moment wasn't the food or the holiday, but the silence that followed my sister's words. I had heard that tone before. At 17, duffel bag on my shoulder, I'd walked out the front door determined to make something of myself. Vivian's laughter followed me down the steps, sharp, certain, humiliating. She said I'd be back in a month, that I didn't have the spine for the world outside. Back then, her voice had nearly broken me. Tonight, decades later, she had sharpened it into a weapon and aimed it straight at me again. Vivian leaned back in her chair, her lipstick catching the candlelight as she raised her voice over the hum of the heating vent. "You don't even own property. How could you possibly contribute when the time comes?" The sentence dangled above the table like a noose waiting for someone to cut it down. Mark, her husband, filled the pause. He adjusted his cufflinks, a banker's reflex, and smirked. "Don't worry," he said smoothly, his words rolling like polished coins. "Maybe a Walmart gift card will cover your share." The clink of silverware against china was the only answer. My parents said nothing. My mother lowered her eyes to her plate, her fork turning a piece of stuffing over and over, as though it held the answer to everything. My father stared at the centerpiece of autumn leaves, his jaw clenched the same way it had been when I asked his blessing to enlist. Neither would meet my eyes. Thomas, my brother, shifted in his chair, his hands folded tightly, his knuckles white. He wanted to speak. I could see it, but the words never came. He looked down at the turkey untouched and winced, as if the silence itself was too heavy to carry. I remembered the night before deployment. I had stood in this very house, my uniform crisp, my heart loud in my chest. They had gathered just as they were now, and instead of pride, I was met with derision. The same laughter, the same sideways glances. Back then it was, "Don't expect to last." Tonight it was, "Don't expect to give." The chorus hadn't changed. The conversation limped on, circling around the cost of care, the rising bills, the sacrifices that had to be made. Vivian spoke as though she were judge and jury, her glass of wine lifted like a gavel. She relished every pause, every cutting remark, every reminder that in her world I was the one with nothing to offer. I sat still, calm on the surface, the storm inside me carefully caged. My hands rested in my lap, but my chest burned. I had faced mortars, night raids, and dust storms that swallowed convoys whole, but nothing ever left me feeling as small as this dining table did. Vivian leaned in her voice, a silk thread strung tight. "To family," she said, raising her glass high, "even the ones who bring nothing but empty chairs." The others shifted, uncomfortable, yet no one stopped her. Her toast hung in the room, cruel and celebratory at once. I felt the familiar burn rise up my throat, but I swallowed it back the way I always had. And then I gave her what she never expected, nothing but calm. I straightened, lifted my eyes to hers, and spoke evenly, my voice steady as stone. "Maybe you've forgotten more than you think." They turned the holiday table into a courtroom, and I was the defendant. The turkey had cooled, the candles guttered, and Vivian's voice filled the room like a gavel strike. She spread papers across the table, her nails clicking against the polished oak. "Here are the figures," she announced. 12,000 a month for Mom and Dad's care. Insurance barely scratches it. Mark leaned in, smooth banker's tone at the ready. We've divided the burden fairly. Vivian and I will cover 70%. Thomas, you'll manage 20. That leaves 10 for Charlotte. His smirk was quick. About what she can handle. No one corrected him. Not Thomas, who fiddled with his watch, or my parents, who sat heavy in silence. I stared at the columns of numbers, each digit another chain meant to anchor me at the bottom. Flashback bled into the moment, a desert night in Iraq, sand in my teeth, a comrade bleeding under my hands. My Bronze Star came from that night, but at home the only question had been, so did anyone die? Vivian lifted her glass as if delivering a verdict. Lottie, you don't even own property. How could you possibly contribute? Her husband added dryly, maybe a Walmart gift card will cover your share. The cruelty wrapped itself in duty. To them, I wasn't a daughter but a liability. The house still smelled of stuffing and sage, yet the air was thick with calculation, not gratitude. Then my phone buzzed. Rachel's name. I excused myself just long enough to answer. Her voice was brisk, professional. Logistics are ready for tomorrow. Same time, same place. Yes, I said, my tone clipped. It's time. I caught Vivian's rolling eyes as I slid the phone back into my pocket. Who was that? She asked with mock sweetness. An assistant, I replied evenly. Her laughter rose sharp. Assistant for what? Certainly not for paying your bills. Mark leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. If she embarrasses you tonight, it could hit the firm's image. Vivian nodded faintly, then turned the knife. From her handbag, she pulled a gift card, sliding it across the table with a flourish. Here, Lottie. This fits your budget. The card gleamed under the chandelier. My parents avoided my eyes. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, lips pressed tight but silent. I picked up the plastic rectangle, turned it once between my fingers, then laid it neatly beside my plate. Calm. Controlled. My heart pounded, but I smiled as if it were a simple kindness. Then I opened my phone again, thumb moving with precision. All right, I said softly. I'll call a friend. The room stilled. Vivian frowned, unsure for once. Mark tilted his head, calculating. My parents froze, as though waiting for me to break. But I didn't break. I dialed, my voice steady. Yes, it's time. The thump of rotor blades cut through the night, shattering Vivian's smile before she could sip her wine. I had already made the call. Rising from the table, I felt the house pause with me. My captain's words from Iraq returned. Never announce. Let the timing speak for you. The first distant tremor rattled the windows. Curtains swelled and snapped as the beat grew louder. Thomas lifted his head, startled. Mark frowned, glancing toward the porch. Vivian set her glass down, her laughter stuck in her throat. Step outside. Now. My voice was even, unhurried. The front door opened to a blast of November wind. Porch lights blinked on across the street, neighbors stepping out in robes and boots. The noise crescendoed, a drumbeat swallowing the block. A helicopter dipped low, its landing lights cutting across our lawn. Leaves scattered like sparks, the maple bowing under the wash. Vivian raised her arm against the gale. Mark cursed, and my parents clung to each other as if the ground itself were shifting. The aircraft touched down with practiced precision. A crewman jogged forward, signaling. Then the pilot slid the cabin door open and climbed out. He scanned the scene, visor lifted, and saluted cleanly. Director Hayes, ready when you are. The word struck Thomas first. Director? His eyes widened, calculation reshaping his silence. Vivian forced a brittle laugh. Is this a circus act? Dragging in a machine to prove a point? I stepped onto the lawn, wind pressing at my jacket. No, I said clearly. This is the air clearing itself. Neighbors lined the sidewalks. Phones raised their faces, shifting toward me, away from her. For once, Vivian's voice failed to command the room or the street. Mark tried to angle his body out of view, muttering about ordinances. The pilot, without glancing his way, replied firmly, "All permitted, sir." My mother clutched my father's arm, her cardigan, whipping eyes wide with awe. I offered her my hand. She took it. My father followed, hesitant but curious. Thomas ducked his head as he approached, scanning the machine with reverence, whispering, "They called you director." "They did," I answered. "Of what?" "Of what you're about to see." Vivian hovered near the porch, hair-wild pride splintering beneath the floodlights. At last she stepped forward, muttering, "Fine. Show me the trick." "No trick," I said. "Just destination." Inside the cabin glowed warm. Seats weighted, headsets lined neatly. The crew strapped us in, my parents first, then Thomas, then the others across from me. Neighbors stood framed in porch light, phones still watching. The pilot settled back into the cockpit, switches snapping to life. On the curb, a boy lifted his arms skyward. His father smiled quietly. The door sealed shut with a metallic clap, tightening the air. The pilot's voice entered our headset, steady and contained. "All secure." I leaned back, headset snug, watching the street fade behind the glass. Vivian's stare burned, but unease shadowed it now. Thomas studied her, recognition dawning. "Ready, director," the pilot said. I gave the order I'd been waiting to speak. "Heritage Haven, wheels up." The glass doors slid open, and the scent of cinnamon and fresh linen greeted us, an answer steadier than any insult. The rotors had barely stilled when silence folded over us again, softer this time, broken only by the whir of the automatic doors. Warm light spilled out across polished wood floors. My boots touched down, first the air inside, carrying cinnamon, fresh linen, and the faint trace of polish. It felt like exhale, after years of holding breath. I remembered desert tents where sand coated every surface, where I bent over scrap paper with a red flashlight. Someday, I whispered to myself then, I'll build a place where no one apologizes for being weak. Tonight, those sketches had grown into walls, into corridors lined with photographs of veterans who had name, stories, and dignity. Rachel Dunn was waiting in the atrium, hair pulled back, crisp uniform softened by a nurse's badge. She smiled, but the steadiness in her eyes was all business. "Evening, Director Hayes." Her voice echoed with recognition, and Thomas's head snapped toward me at the word. Vivian tightened her coat around her, scanning the hall with quick jerks, searching for flaws. "Lovely staging," she muttered. Mark said nothing. His gaze snagged on the artwork, the lighting, the numbers already forming in his mind. My parents clung together, their awe plain, their silence heavy but no longer empty. We walked past framed photographs, soldiers clasping hands, residents in wheelchairs smiling beneath autumn trees, walls decorated not with charity slogans, but with faces. Each staff member we passed greeted me with quiet respect. "Evening, Director." Their voices stacked into a chorus that Vivian couldn't mute. Rachel led us to a glass conference room. On the polished table sat a single binder. She laid her hand on it as though presenting evidence in court. "Trust Hayes," she said. "Endowment accounts established. All funds verified. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes listed here as full beneficiaries." She opened the pages, bold letters spelling my parents' names. Vivian leaned forward, her laugh brittle. "This is staged smoke and mirrors, Charlotte." Rachel didn't flinch. She turned another page, her voice precise. "I was there when she carried 3 men out under fire. I saw her refuse evacuation until every one of us was safe. I've worn the scars since. You'll forgive me if I say this isn't staged." The words landed heavier than any insult. Thomas's eyes widened as if puzzle pieces were snapping into place. Mark muttered, flipping through pages he barely understood. "These numbers, they're real." His lips pressed thin. For once, his fear was financial, not performative. I pulled a document free, sliding it across the table toward my parents. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "Sign here. From tonight, you'll never fear another medical bill." Thomas picked up the contract, his lawyer's cadence activating. "Legally binding," he read aloud. "Watertight." He glanced at me, and for the first time his eyes carried respect. My father's hands trembled as he traced the letters of his name. My mother pressed hers to her mouth, whispering thanks she couldn't finish. Vivian sank into her chair, her face a mask cracking at the edges. I stayed silent, I said softly, so the truth could grow too big to ignore. The elevator dinged behind us, doors parted. A man on crutches stepped into the hall, uniform pressed through, worn with years. He paused, lifted one hand in salute, and his voice carried steady. "Ma'am, she saved us." Vivian paled, her veneers shattering, and the mask she wore for decades slipped beyond repair. All my life their silence buried me, but tonight, that silence shattered like glass. The lounge was hushed, windows black against warm lamps, the binder glowing on the table. I saw myself at 17, duffel bag in hand, my father's voice at my back. "You'll regret this forever." Now his hand trembled as it reached for mine. Edward's throat worked. "I was wrong. We should have been proud." Helen sobbed, wiping her eyes. "We are proud, Charlotte." Thomas stepped forward, finally closing years of distance. "You've carried more than we knew. I'm sorry." The words carried no remedy, just recognition. Vivian's laugh was a splinter. "You're all sorry now. I needed you to fail, because if you won, what would I be afraid?" I said. "And fear never gave you the right to crush me." She flinched. Mark sat, rigid, lips pressed tight, calculating but silent. Rachel entered, setting a folder beside the binder. "Heritage Haven has been chosen for federal expansion, multi-year, multi-site." She slid out documents stamped with seals and signatures. Mark leaned in despite himself. "This scale, it's real." Vivian lifted her chin, but no words came. Silence circled back this time as judgment. I rested my palm on the binder. "This is what I built so Mom and Dad never fear another bill." Vivian's mask cracked. "You made me look like a fool." I met her eyes steady. "No, Vivian. You did that yourself when you chose contempt over truth." The room held stillness. My father squeezed my hand. Helen leaned close. Thomas laid a hand on my shoulder. For the first time, I felt their weight behind me instead of pressing down. Rachel's voice tied the moment tight. "Independent oversight confirmed this today. Your leadership is named explicitly." Vivian sagged into her chair, armor falling away. Mark avoided the windows, already tallying reputational costs. I spoke the line that had waited for decades. "I don't need your validation." I only needed silence long enough for the truth to speak. My parents wept openly. Thomas's touch steadied, and Rachel's quiet pride anchored the room. I walked them as far as the terrace. The doors opened with a whisper, night air cooling my face. The compound stretched still and certain beneath the November dark. My parents clasped my hands. Thomas's palm settled firm on my shoulder. Behind me, Vivian sat, collapsed, her reign over silence ended. I stepped onto the porch alone. Far off, a rotor hummed faint across the sky, not menace now, but heartbeat. I closed my eyes and let it fade. Justice had come not with spectacle, but whole. I've carried silence for years, but tonight I finally proved that dignity doesn't need applause, it just needs truth. If my story moved, you stand with me now. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my place, and share words I can carry forward. I want to hear your advice. How do you turn pain into purpose? Life will test us with betrayal and doubt, but we don't have to surrender. Together, let's remind each other that justice may come late, but it always arrives for those who refuse to bow.